The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. Nia Torres stared at the cream-colored paper in her trembling hands, her name written in elegant gold script across the front. No return address, no postmark, just her name, perfectly spelled, waiting on her apartment doorstep like it belonged there. Inside, the invitation was even more mysterious. Ms. Torres, your presence is requested for dinner at Le Bernardin tonight at 8 p.m. A car will arrive at 7:30 p.m. No need to respond. I already know you'll come. Julian Cross. Julian Cross. The name hit her like lightning. Everyone knew that name. Tech billionaire. Youngest person to ever crack Forbes' top 10. The man who owned half of Manhattan and probably the other half too. But Nia? She worked double shifts at a diner in Queens, splitting rent with her roommate Amina just to keep the lights on. Why would Julian Cross know she existed? Her phone buzzed. Amina's face appeared on the cracked screen, eyes wide with disbelief as she held up an identical invitation. Nia, what the hell is this? Amina whispered into the phone. How does he know us? We've never even been in the same zip code as this guy. The questions multiplied like wildfire. Had they won something? Was this some elaborate joke? A mistake? Nia's heart pounded against her ribs as she read the invitation again, searching for clues that weren't there. At 7:30 p.m. sharp, a black sedan pulled up outside their building. The driver stepped out, dressed in a crisp uniform, and nodded respectfully. Ms. Torres? Ms. Hassan? Mr. Cross is expecting you. This was really happening. As the car glided through the city streets, Nia pressed her face against the tinted window, watching her familiar world disappear behind them. Every block they traveled felt like crossing into a different universe, one where people like Julian Cross noticed people like her. The leather seats, the soft classical music, the driver's polite silence, it all felt like a dream. Or maybe a trap. What if he's dangerous? Amina whispered, voicing the fear they both carried. But curiosity burned stronger than fear. In less than 30 minutes, they'd meet the most powerful man in the city. A man who somehow knew they existed, who had chosen them for reasons they couldn't begin to understand. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, and Nia's breath caught in her throat. Whatever Julian Cross wanted, there was no turning back now. If you were in Nia's shoes, would you go? Subscribe to see what happens next. Le Bernardin rose before them like a palace made of glass and gold. Nia had walked past restaurants like this before, but never through their doors. The valet took one look at their thrift store dresses and hesitated for just a moment, long enough to make them both feel like intruders in paradise. Inside, the world transformed completely. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in white silk. The air smelled of expensive wine and fresh orchids. Every person in sight looked like they stepped from a magazine cover, speaking in hushed tones about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. We don't belong here, Amina breathed, clutching Nia's arm. The maitre d' approached with a smile that felt rehearsed. Ms. Torres and Ms. Hassan? Right this way. Mr. Cross has been waiting. They followed him through the dining room, past tables where conversation stopped and eyes followed their path. Nia's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept walking, her chin lifted with determination she didn't feel. At the far corner, in a private alcove overlooking Central Park, sat Julian Cross. He wasn't what Nia expected. The photos in magazines showed a cold, calculating business titan. But the man who stood to greet them had warm brown eyes and a genuine smile that reached them completely. He wore a simple black sweater instead of the expensive suits she'd seen in Forbes. His hair was slightly messed, like he'd been running his fingers through it. Nia. Amina. He said their names like he'd known them for years. Thank you for coming. I know this must seem strange. Strange didn't begin to cover it. He pulled out their chairs himself, not waiting for the hovering waitstaff. His hands were calloused, Surprising for someone who supposedly spent his days in boardrooms making billion-dollar decisions. "I have to ask," Nia said, finding her voice. "Why us? We're nobody special." Julian's expression shifted, becoming almost sad. "That's where you're wrong. You're exactly who I've been looking for." The way he said it sent chills down her spine. Not threatening, something deeper. Like he was sharing a secret that could change everything. He ordered wine without asking their preference, but somehow chose perfectly. As the sommelier poured, Julian's eyes never left their faces, studying them with an intensity that made Nia's pulse quicken. "I know this feels overwhelming," he said softly, "but I promise you, by the end of tonight, you'll understand why fate brought us together." Fate. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibilities neither girl could imagine. The first course arrived with theatrical precision. A server placed delicate plates before them, each dish looking more like art than food. Nia had never seen anything so beautiful or so intimidating. She watched Julian pick up his fork and tried to mirror his movements, terrified of making a mistake. But the servers had already made their judgments. More water. The waiter's tone was polite enough for Julian to hear, but his eyes held contempt as he looked at Nia. When she nodded, he poured with deliberate carelessness, letting drops splash onto the white tablecloth. Julian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. At the neighboring table, a woman in diamonds whispered loudly to her companion, "I don't understand what's happening to this place. The clientele used to be so refined." Nia's cheeks burned. She wanted to shrink into her chair, to disappear completely. This was exactly what she'd feared, being exposed as someone who didn't belong in this glittering world. Another server approached with the wine list, completely ignoring Nia and Amina while addressing Julian exclusively. "Sir, would you care to select something more appropriate for your guests?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Nia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. The shame felt suffocating. Every person in this restaurant could see through her cheap dress and borrowed jewelry. They knew she was a fraud playing dress-up in their sacred space. But Julian's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Actually," he said, his tone deceptively calm, "I think you misunderstand who's inappropriate here." The server's face went white. Julian stood slowly, his presence suddenly commanding the entire restaurant's attention. "These ladies are my honored guests. If anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to find somewhere else to dine." The silence was deafening. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward their table. Nia felt like she was drowning in the attention, but Julian's unwavering confidence kept her afloat. "Furthermore," Julian continued, his voice carrying across the room, "I own 40% of this establishment. So when I say my guests deserve respect, that's not a suggestion." The maitre d' appeared instantly, apologizing profusely. Servers scrambled to attention. The woman with the diamonds suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. Julian sat back down as if nothing had happened, but Nia saw the fire still burning in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "Some people mistake wealth for worth." Nia stared at him, speechless. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever made her feel worthy of defending. In that moment, she realized Julian Cross wasn't just rich, he was different. And that difference would change everything. As the evening progressed, Nia found herself relaxing despite the earlier tension. Julian had a way of asking questions that made her want to answer honestly. When he asked about her work, she didn't give the usual polite responses. Instead, she found herself talking about the double shifts, the exhaustion, the way her feet ached after 14-hour days serving people who barely looked at her. "Amina's in college," she said, glancing at her younger sister with pride. "Pre-med. She's going to be a doctor." What she didn't say was how she'd dropped out of her own nursing program to pay for Amina's tuition. How she'd sold their mother's wedding ring to cover the dorm deposit. How she sometimes skipped meals to make sure Amina had everything she needed. Julian seemed to sense the weight behind her words. "That must be challenging," he said simply, without the pity she'd learned to hate from others. Challenging. Such a gentle word for the crushing responsibility that had shaped her entire adult life. Nia thought about the morning 3 years ago when their parents died in the car accident. She was 22, Amina was 17. In one moment, she'd gone from being a college student with dreams of her own to being a guardian, a provider, a parent to someone who needed her completely. The insurance money had lasted 6 months. After that, it was just Nia against the world, working every job she could find to keep them both afloat. Restaurant shifts, cleaning offices at night, weekend catering gigs, anything to pay rent and keep Amina in school. Dating had become impossible. How do you explain to someone that your life isn't your own? That every decision you make depends on whether it's good for your sister? The few guys who tried to get close had eventually drifted away when they realized Nia came with responsibilities they weren't ready to handle. The loneliness had become her constant companion. But watching Amina thrive in college, seeing her sister's eyes light up when she talked about her biology classes, that made every sacrifice worth it. Nia would work herself into the ground if it meant Amina could become the doctor she dreamed of being. "She's brilliant," Nia said, love evident in her voice. "Much smarter than I ever was. She's going to save lives." Julian studied her face intently. "What about your life? What do you want?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. When was the last time someone had asked her that? When was the last time she'd even allowed herself to think about it? "I want." She paused, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "I want to matter, to make a difference somehow." She'd never said that out loud before. Julian watched Nia's face transform as she spoke about her sister, and something twisted painfully in his chest. He recognized that look, the fierce protectiveness mixed with quiet desperation. He'd worn that same expression in the mirror for years, though his circumstances had been vastly different. While Nia struggled to keep her family afloat, Julian had been drowning in expectations that came with inheriting billions at 25. The media painted him as a golden boy who'd never known hardship, but they didn't know about the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of knowing that thousands of employees depended on decisions he sometimes felt too young to make. Money solved many problems, but it created others that most people couldn't understand. He'd been engaged once to Victoria Sterling, a socialite who'd seemed perfect on paper, beautiful, educated, from the right family. But he'd discovered she was selling stories about their relationship to tabloids, turning their most intimate moments into entertainment for strangers. After Victoria, Julian had built walls around himself. Every woman who approached him wanted something: access to his world, his connections, his money. None of them saw past the Forbes articles to the man underneath who sometimes felt completely alone despite being surrounded by people. That's why he'd created the test. For months, he'd been watching, not through private investigators or elaborate schemes, but through the simple act of paying attention to how people treated others when they thought no one important was looking. He'd seen Nia at the diner where she worked, watching how she treated the homeless man who came in every Tuesday. She always found an excuse to give him free coffee, extra food, a kind word. She never made him feel like a burden, even when her manager wasn't looking. He'd seen her walk Amina to the subway every morning, despite working until 2 a.m. the night before. Seen her give her own jacket to a shivering child at the bus stop. Seen her refuse tips when she thought customers couldn't afford them. Nia Torres had no idea she was being observed, which made her kindness authentic in a way Julian rarely encountered. Tonight wasn't about charity or playing God with people's lives. It was about recognizing something rare in a world that had taught him to be suspicious of everyone's motives. "Tell me about your dreams," he said, leaning forward. Before life got complicated, Nia hesitated, as if the question itself was dangerous. "I wanted to be a nurse," she admitted quietly. to help people when they're scared and hurting. But that was a long time ago. Julian felt something shift inside him. Here was someone who'd sacrificed her own dreams to lift someone else up, while he'd been given every opportunity and still felt empty. Maybe they could help each other in ways neither of them expected. Amina had been quiet through most of the dinner, wide-eyed and overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding them. But as dessert arrived, delicate chocolate sculptures that looked too beautiful to eat, she finally found her voice. "Mr. Cross," she said tentatively, "can I ask you something?" Julian smiled encouragingly. "Of course." "Does having all this money make you happy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nia shot her sister a warning look, mortified by the directness. But Julian's expression grew thoughtful rather than offended. "That's a fair question," he said slowly. "Happiness is complicated. Money can solve problems, but it can't create meaning. It can buy comfort, but not connection." He paused, his eyes moving between the sisters. "The happiest moments in my life haven't cost anything at all." Amina nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Nia always says the best things in life are free. Like when she reads to kids at the library on Sundays, or when we watch movies on our laptop and eat popcorn for dinner." Nia's face flushed. Those simple moments were precious to her, but she hadn't realized Amina treasured them too. "Your sister sounds like a wise woman," Julian said, his gaze warming as it settled on Nia. "She is," Amina said fiercely. "She gave up everything for me. Her college, her dreams, even dating. She pretends it's okay, but sometimes I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep." "Amina," Nia started, mortified. "It's true though," Amina continued, tears gathering in her eyes. "You sacrifice everything to make sure I have chances you never got. That's real love, not the fake kind you see in movies." The raw emotion in the young woman's voice created a sacred quiet at their table. Julian found himself deeply moved by this glimpse into their relationship, the selfless love that had shaped both sisters in profound ways. "You know what I've learned?" Julian said softly. "The richest people I know aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones who would give up anything for the people they love." He looked directly at Nia. "That kind of wealth can't be bought or inherited. It has to be earned through actions, through choosing someone else's well-being over your own comfort." Nia felt tears threatening. She'd spent so many nights wondering if she'd made the right choices, if her sacrifices mattered. To hear this powerful man acknowledge what she'd given up, it felt like validation she hadn't known she needed. "Family isn't just about blood," Julian continued. "It's about showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." In that moment, surrounded by crystal and gold, the three of them shared something more valuable than anything money could buy: genuine understanding between souls who'd all known the weight of caring for others. The evening had been going perfectly until the sommelier returned. Julian had just finished sharing a story about his first board meeting, how he'd been so nervous he'd spilled coffee on his presentation when the wine expert approached their table with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Cross," the man said, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "there's been a situation. Some of our regular patrons have expressed concerns about the dining atmosphere tonight." The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. Julian's face transformed. Gone was the warm, genuine man who'd been making them laugh moments before. In his place sat someone Nia recognized from magazine covers, cold, calculating, dangerous. "What kind of concerns?" Julian's voice was quietly lethal. The sommelier shifted uncomfortably. "Well, sir, they feel that certain guests might be more comfortable in our private dining area, away from the main floor." Nia's stomach plummeted. They wanted to hide her and Amina away like dirty secrets, tucked out of sight so the real customers could dine in peace. "I see." Julian stood slowly, his movement predatory. "And you agreed with this assessment?" "Sir, I merely thought." "You thought wrong." The words cracked like a whip across the restaurant. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen seemed to go quiet. Julian pulled out his phone with deliberate precision. "Let me make something crystal clear to everyone in this establishment." His fingers moved across the screen as he spoke, each word landing like a hammer blow. "I'm transferring ownership of my shares in this restaurant to someone who understands the true meaning of hospitality." The maitre d' appeared as if summoned by magic, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Cross, please, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all." Julian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You've shown me exactly who you are. All of you." He turned to address the entire dining room, his voice carrying to every corner. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet two of the most remarkable people I've ever encountered. Nia Torres works 3 jobs to put her sister through medical school. She gives food to homeless people when she can barely afford her own meals. She reads to children at the library on her only day off. Nia wanted to disappear into the floor, but Julian's voice held her captive. Amina Hassan is studying to become a doctor so she can help people who can't afford health care. These women have more class, dignity, and worth than everyone else in this room combined." The silence was deafening. "So here's what's going to happen," Julian continued, his tone brooking no argument. "Anyone who has a problem dining in the same space as my guests can leave. Now, the valet will call you a car." No one moved. Julian sat back down, his demeanor shifting instantly back to warm and attentive. "Now, where were we?" But Nia couldn't speak. Her heart was pounding, so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. No one had ever fought for her like that. No one had ever made her feel worthy of such fierce protection. And that terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. The tension in the restaurant slowly dissolved, but Amina had been watching everything with sharp, knowing eyes. "Why do people act like that?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the forced normalcy. "Like having money makes them better than other people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to every adult who'd ever made assumptions based on appearances. Julian considered his answer carefully. "Fear, I think. When you've built your identity around what you have instead of who you are, you need other people to have less so you can feel more." "That's stupid," Amina said with the brutal honesty only teenagers could deliver. "My biology teacher says the strongest organisms are the ones that help each other survive, not the ones that fight over resources." Nia almost choked on her water. Leave it to her sister to reduce complex social dynamics to scientific principles. "You know what I noticed?" Amina continued, warming to her subject. "The people who were meanest to us tonight, they kept looking around to see if others were watching them be mean. Like they needed approval for their cruelty." Julian's eyebrows raised. This 17-year-old had just articulated something it had taken him years of therapy to understand. "But you," Amina pointed at Julian, "you didn't look around when you defended us. You just did it because it was right. That's the difference between real power and fake power." The observation hit like lightning. Even Nia stared at her sister in amazement. When had Amina become so insightful about human nature? "Where I come from," Amina said, slicing her dessert with surgical precision, "we have a saying. You can tell a person's true character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them." She looked directly at Julian. "Those servers? They were nice to you and horrible to us because they thought we were nobody. That tells you everything about them." Julian leaned forward, genuinely curious. "And what does my behavior tell you about me?" Amina didn't hesitate. "That you're lonely. Really, really lonely. And you're tired of people pretending to like you for your money." The brutal accuracy of her words created a stunned silence. "Amina," Nia whispered, mortified by her sister's directness. "What?" "It's obvious," Amina shrugged. "He's sitting here with us, instead of with people from his world, because we're the first people in forever who didn't know who he was when we walked in. We liked him before we knew about the money. Julian's laugh was soft and genuine. Has anyone ever told you that you are remarkably perceptive? My guidance counselor says I have concerning levels of emotional intelligence for my age. Amina replied matter-of-factly. I think that's adult speak for this kid sees through our nonsense. She turned to study the other diners, most of whom were still sneaking glances at their table. Look at them. They're all performing wealth instead of living life. Wearing designer clothes like costumes, ordering expensive wine they probably can't taste, speaking in quiet voices about things that don't matter. Her gaze returned to Julian. You could have that life. The fake friends, the shallow conversations, the people who laugh at your jokes because they have to. But you chose to have dinner with a waitress and a college student instead. She smiled and suddenly looked exactly her age again. That makes you either really smart or really crazy. I'm hoping it's smart. After Amina's brutal honesty, something shifted between Julian and Nia. The pretense was gone. The careful politeness had been stripped away by a 17-year-old's unflinching observations, leaving only raw truth in its wake. She's right, you know, Julian said quietly as Amina excused herself to the restroom. About the loneliness. Nia felt her chest tighten. She recognized that particular brand of isolation, the kind that came from being surrounded by people who only saw what you could do for them, not who you actually were. I used to think, Julian continued, his voice barely above a whisper, that if I was successful enough, generous enough, perfect enough, someone would eventually see past the money to the person underneath. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what it's like to wonder if anyone would care about you if you lost everything tomorrow? Nia's heart broke a little. She'd spent her whole life worried about not having enough, but she'd never considered the burden of having too much. Yes, she said simply. Julian looked startled. Yes. I wonder all the time if people only tolerate me because I'm useful. Because I work extra shifts when others call out sick. Because I don't complain when customers are rude. Because I make other people's lives easier by not having needs of my own. The parallel hit them both like a revelation. We're both afraid of the same thing, Nia realized. That we're only valued for what we give, not who we are. Julian's eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. When was the last time someone cared about your happiness without expecting anything in return? The question pierced straight through her defenses. She couldn't remember. Every relationship in her life came with obligations. Taking care of Amina, pleasing customers, meeting her landlord's expectations. Even her friendships had faded as she became too exhausted and overwhelmed to maintain them. I don't know, she whispered. Neither do I, Julian admitted. They sat in that shared vulnerability for a moment. Two people who'd built their identities around serving others, recognizing themselves in each other's wounds. I'm scared, Nia said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Of what? Of hoping. Of thinking that maybe. She struggled to find the words. Of believing that someone like you could see something worthwhile in someone like me. Julian reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing hers. The contact was electric. Nia, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been searching my entire adult life for someone who would choose kindness over advantage. Someone whose first instinct is to lift others up instead of climbing over them. His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. You do that without even thinking about it. It's not something you learned or calculated. It's who you are at your core. Tears gathered in Nia's eyes. She'd spent so long seeing herself as ordinary, unremarkable, barely worth noticing. To hear this extraordinary man describe her like she was precious felt like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. But fear crept in alongside the hope. People like Julian didn't stay with people like her. This was a beautiful moment, but moments ended. Reality always returned. We've all faced moments like this. Subscribe to witness how courage can change a life. When Amina returned from the restroom, she found Julian and Nia leaning toward each other, speaking in hushed tones like co-conspirators sharing secrets. "What did I miss?" she asked, sliding back into her chair. "Everything," Nia said softly, her eyes never leaving Julian's face. The air between them hummed with new understanding, fragile and powerful at the same time. Julian signaled for coffee, and as the server approached, now respectful to the point of being obsequious, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind all evening. "What do you dream about, Nia? When you're alone at night, what do you imagine your life could be?" The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so long focused on immediate survival that dreaming felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "I used to dream about nursing school," she said slowly. "About walking into a hospital room and making someone feel less afraid. About being the person who held someone's hand when they got scary news or celebrated with families when everything turned out okay." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the dormant dream awakening. "I wanted to be in the moments that mattered most: birth, healing, hope. I wanted to be useful in ways that actually changed lives." Julian listened with complete attention, not rushing to fill the silence when she paused. "But more than that," Nia continued, surprising herself with the honesty, "I dream about stability. About not checking my bank balance before buying groceries. About taking Amina somewhere beautiful for vacation instead of working through every holiday. About having time to read books just for pleasure, or learn something new just because it interests me." She laughed self-consciously. "Simple things. Boring things, probably." "Not boring at all," Julian said firmly. "Security isn't boring when you've never had it. Peace isn't boring when you've been fighting battles every single day." Amina nodded emphatically. "Nia never complains, but I know she hasn't bought herself anything new in 2 years. Everything goes to my tuition or our rent or food. She patches her work shoes with duct tape and pretends it's fine." "Amina." "It's true," her sister insisted. "You deserve beautiful things too. You deserve to have dreams that aren't just about keeping other people afloat." Julian's expression grew thoughtful. "What scares you most about hoping for more?" Nia considered the question carefully. "Disappointment, I guess. When you don't expect much, life can't really let you down. But when you start believing things could be different." She shrugged. "The fall hurts more." "I understand that," Julian said quietly. "I've been disappointed by people so many times that I stopped trusting anyone's motives. I convinced myself it was safer to assume the worst." He looked around the restaurant, at the crystal chandeliers, the perfect service, the wealthy diners pretending not to stare at their table. "But tonight, sitting here with you both, I remember what it felt like to hope for genuine connection, to believe that maybe authenticity still exists in the world." Amina grinned. "See? You're both scared of the same thing, caring about people who might actually care back." The teenagers' blunt assessment made them both laugh, breaking some of the tension that had built around their shared vulnerabilities. "What about you, Julian?" Nia asked, turning the question back to him. "What do you dream about?" His answer came without hesitation. "I dream about meaning. About using everything I've been given, the resources, the influence, the opportunities, to create something that matters beyond profit margins and stock prices." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I dream about sharing that purpose with someone who understands that true wealth comes from the lives you touch, not the money you accumulate." As the evening wound down, Julian noticed something that made his heart tighten. Amina had been fighting to stay awake for the past 20 minutes, her eyelids growing heavy despite her obvious desire to savor every moment of this magical night. She kept blinking hard and straightening up, determined not to miss a single word of their conversation. "Long day?" Julian asked gently. Amina nodded sheepishly. "I had organic chemistry lab this morning, then work study at the campus library, then calculus tutoring. But I didn't want a night to end." Without fanfare, Julian stood and walked to the hostess station. He returned moments later with a soft cashmere throw that restaurants like this kept for chilly evening terraces. "Here," he said, draping it carefully around Amina's shoulders. "Better." The gesture was so naturally paternal that it brought tears to Nia's eyes. No father figure had ever looked out for Amina this way. Their dad had died when she was still so young, and since then it had been just the two sisters against the world. Julian's care didn't stop there. He quietly asked their server to prepare a to-go box with extra desserts for studying fuel later. When Amina mentioned being nervous about her upcoming organic chemistry midterm, he pulled out his phone and, within minutes, had connected her with a PhD student from Colombia who specialized in tutoring pre-med students. "Dr. Reyes is brilliant," Julian explained. "She'll help you master the concepts, not just memorize formulas. I'll take care of the sessions. Consider it an investment in a future doctor." Amina's eyes went wide. "I can't accept that, Mr. Cross. It's too much." Julian's expression grew serious. "Amina, someday you're going to save lives. Maybe you'll deliver a baby, or catch a diagnosis that saves someone's future, or simply hold someone's hand when they're scared. That service to humanity? It's priceless. The tutoring sessions are nothing compared to what you'll give back to the world." Nia watched this exchange with wonder and growing fear. Julian wasn't just being kind. He was investing in their future with the casual generosity of someone who truly believed in their potential. It was beautiful and terrifying. As they prepared to leave, Julian helped Amina into her jacket with the same gentle care he might show his own sister. He asked about her classes, her favorite subjects, her concerns about medical school applications, listening to her answers with genuine interest rather than polite attention. "You remind me of someone," he told Amina as they walked toward the exit. "My Aunt Sophia. She became a surgeon despite everyone telling her it wasn't appropriate for women. She always said the world needs healers who remember what it feels like to hurt." Amina glowed under his encouragement. "That's exactly why I want to do this. I want to help people who feel invisible, like Nia and I have felt sometimes." Julian stopped walking and looked at both sisters with an expression Nia couldn't quite read. "You're not invisible," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The car ride home passed in a dreamlike haze. Amina fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the evening. She curled up in the soft leather seat, still wrapped in Julian's cashmere throw, looking younger than her 17 years. Nia stared out the window at the city lights, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The luxurious dinner, Julian's fierce defense of them, the tender way he'd cared for Amina. It all felt too good to be true. And that's what scared her most. "Penny for your thoughts?" Julian asked softly, not wanting to wake Amina. Nia turned to face him, studying his profile in the dim light of the car. Even in shadow, he was devastatingly handsome. But it wasn't his looks that had captured her heart tonight. It was his kindness, his authenticity, the way he'd seen value in her when she barely saw it in herself. "I'm waiting for the catch," she admitted. Julian frowned. "What do you mean?" "This whole night. The invitation, the dinner, the way you defended us, how sweet you were to Amina." She gestured helplessly. "People like you don't do things like this for people like us, without wanting something in return." The words hung between them like an accusation. Julian was quiet for a long moment, and Nia's heart sank. She'd been right to be suspicious. There was an agenda, a hidden motive she hadn't seen yet. "You're right," Julian said finally. Nia's stomach dropped to the floor. "I do want something from you," he continued, his voice barely audible over the car's engine. Here it comes, Nia thought. The proposition, the request, the real reason behind this elaborate evening. Maybe he wanted her to be his mistress, conveniently available but hidden from his real world. Maybe this was how billionaires entertained themselves, playing with poor girls like toys they could discard when they got bored. "I want your trust," Julian said simply. Nia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" I want you to trust me enough to believe that someone could care about you without an ulterior motive. I want you to trust that your worth isn't contingent on what you can do for others." His voice grew rough with emotion. "I want you to trust that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be cherished for exactly who you are." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so prepared for exploitation that genuine affection felt like a foreign language. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "Neither do I," Julian admitted. "But I'd like to learn. With you." Nia felt tears threatening again. The vulnerability in his voice, the careful hope in his words. It was everything she'd ever wanted to hear, and everything she was most afraid to believe. What if she opened her heart and he changed his mind? What if this was just a phase for him, a novelty that would wear off when the reality of her complicated life set in? What if Amina got attached to the idea of having someone look out for them, only to have that support vanish without warning? The risks felt enormous, but so did the possibility of love. "I'm scared," she said again, the words becoming her prayer and her confession. Julian reached across the seat and took her hand. "So am I. But maybe being scared together is better than being safe and alone." Outside the car windows, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, indifferent to the two hearts learning to hope against hope in the back of a sedan moving through the night. When they reached the apartment building in Queens, Julian insisted on walking them to their door. The contrast between their modest neighborhood and the world they'd just left was jarring. Broken streetlights cast uneven shadows across cracked pavement. The building's entrance needed paint, and the security buzzer had been broken for months. Nia felt embarrassed, seeing their humble home through Julian's eyes. But if he noticed the difference, he didn't show it. He simply walked beside them, carrying Amina's leftover desserts like they were precious cargo. At their door, Amina finally stirred awake. "Are we home?" she asked groggily, then looked around in confusion. "Wait, did you come up with us, Mr. Cross?" "I wanted to make sure you both got home safely," Julian said. As Nia fumbled for her keys, Amina's sleepy mind seemed to process their surroundings. She looked at Julian standing in their narrow hallway, then at Nia's tense shoulders, and something seemed to click. "You should know," Amina said suddenly, her voice still thick with sleep but gaining clarity. "Nia cries herself to sleep sometimes." "Amina." Nia's face burned with mortification. But her sister continued, either too tired to filter herself or too honest to stop. "She thinks I don't hear, but the walls are thin. She cries when the bills come, when her feet hurt too much to walk, when she has to choose between buying her medicine or buying my textbooks." Julian's expression grew very still. "She never complains during the day," Amina went on, leaning against the doorframe. "She smiles at customers who are rude to her. She pretends it doesn't hurt when people treat her like she's nobody. But at night, when she thinks I'm asleep, she lets herself feel how tired she is." Nia wanted to disappear. This was exactly what she'd feared. Julian seeing too much, learning too much about their struggles. Rich men didn't want to deal with crying women and financial problems and the messy reality of poverty. "She gave up her dreams for me," Amina said, her voice breaking slightly. "She was supposed to be a nurse. She was already accepted to the program when our parents died. But she chose me instead." The admission hung in the air like a sacred revelation. Julian looked at Nia with an expression she couldn't read. Not pity, something deeper and more complex. "The worst part," Amina continued, tears now flowing freely, "is that she thinks she's ordinary. She thinks what she's done for me is what any sister would do. But it's not. What she's sacrificed, the way she's loved me, it's extraordinary." Nia's own tears started falling then, overwhelmed by her sister's words and terrified of Julian's reaction. This was too much honesty, too much raw truth for someone who'd only known them for one evening. "She deserves everything beautiful in the world," Amina whispered. "But she's forgotten how to believe that about herself." The silence that followed felt endless. Julian stepped forward, and for a moment Nia thought he was going to leave, excuse himself politely, and disappear from their lives forever. Instead, he pulled both sisters into a gentle embrace. "Thank you for telling me that, Amina," he said quietly. "It helps me understand something I suspected but couldn't prove." He looked directly into Nia's eyes. "You're not ordinary. You're not invisible. And you're definitely not alone anymore." The promise in his voice made Nia's knees weak. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust this impossible gift that had walked into her life disguised as a dinner invitation. The next morning, Julian couldn't stop thinking about Amina's words. He sat in his penthouse office, 30 floors above the city, trying to focus on quarterly reports and acquisition strategies. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nia's face. The mortification when her sister revealed her private struggles. The fear when she waited for his reaction. She expected him to run. Everyone always expected him to run. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Cross, your 10 a.m. is here." "Cancel it," Julian said without looking up. "Cancel everything today." Instead of meetings and conference calls, Julian found himself remembering his own childhood tears. The ones he'd hidden so carefully that most people still didn't know they'd ever existed. Everyone saw the successful businessman, the tech prodigy who'd inherited billions and multiplied them. They didn't see the 8-year-old boy who'd been sent to boarding school because his parents were too busy building their empire to raise their own son. He'd learned early that love was conditional. His mother loved him when he brought home perfect report cards. His father loved him when he showed interest in the family business. His boarding school friends loved him when he shared care packages or paid for pizza parties. But nobody had ever loved Julian Cross the person. Messy, uncertain, sometimes scared. They loved the idea of him, the potential of him, the benefits of knowing him. Until Victoria had taught him the cruelest lesson of all. He'd thought she was different. For 2 years, she'd seemed to genuinely care about his thoughts, his fears, his dreams. She'd held him when he had panic attacks about taking over the company. She'd listened when he shared his insecurities about whether he deserved his inherited wealth. Then he discovered she'd been recording their most intimate conversations, selling stories about his vulnerabilities to tabloids for 6-figure payments. Julian Cross. Inside the panic attacks of a billionaire. The billion-dollar baby. How wealth can't buy mental health. Trust fund tears. The secret breakdown of America's golden boy. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Not just the public humiliation, but the realization that even his pain had been commodified, turned into entertainment for strangers. After Victoria, Julian had built walls so high that most people needed an appointment just to speak to him. He'd convinced himself it was safer to stay isolated than to risk that kind of betrayal again. But sitting in that restaurant last night, watching Nia's genuine care for her sister, seeing her natural kindness toward servers who'd been cruel to her, he'd recognized something he'd almost given up believing in: authenticity. Nia Torres didn't know about his panic attacks or his childhood loneliness or his fear that he was fundamentally unlovable. She'd connected with him as a person, not a bank account. When Amina had called him lonely, it had been an observation, not an exploitation. For the first time in years, Julian felt seen rather than studied. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for last night. You made Amina feel special, and that means everything to me. Nia." Julian stared at the message, his chest tight with emotion. Even after everything, the public confrontation, the revelation of their struggles, his obvious interest, Nia was thanking him for kindness to her sister. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't angling for more dinners or expensive gifts or introductions to his world. She was simply grateful that someone had seen value in the person she loved most. Julian had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Nia Torres wanted nothing except for her sister to feel worthy of kindness. And in that moment, Julian realized he was already falling in love with her. 3 days passed without contact, and Nia felt like she was losing her mind. She'd replayed every moment of that dinner 1,000 times, analyzing Julian's expressions, dissecting his words, searching for clues about what came next. Had she imagined the connection between them? Had Amina's brutal honesty scared him away after all? Work became her refuge from the endless questions. She threw herself into double shifts at the diner, grateful for the mindless routine of taking orders and refilling coffee cups. At least here, she knew the rules. Smile, serve, collect tips, go home. Simple. But even the familiar rhythm of her job couldn't quiet the voice in her head that whispered, "He saw you. Really saw you." And then he disappeared. On Thursday morning, everything changed. Nia arrived at work to find her manager, Pete, waiting with an expression she'd never seen before, something between confusion and awe. "Torres," he said, holding up an official-looking envelope. "This came for you yesterday. Certified mail." Nia's hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a letter from Columbia University's School of Nursing, along with several other documents she couldn't immediately process. "Dear Ms. Torres, we are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a full scholarship to complete your nursing degree. This scholarship covers all tuition, fees, books, and provides a living stipend." The letter slipped from her numb fingers. "Nia." Pete's voice sounded far away. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The scholarship was worth over $200,000. It would cover everything, not just school, but living expenses that would let her focus on studies instead of working 3 jobs. But she knew exactly who had made this possible. The accompanying materials included a note from the scholarship committee. This award is funded by an anonymous donor who believes in supporting students who demonstrate exceptional dedication to serving others. Anonymous. Right. Julian had somehow arranged this without asking her permission, without even discussing it with her. He'd simply decided she deserved a chance at her dreams and made it happen with the casual ease of someone who could reshape reality with a phone call. The gesture was breathtakingly generous and absolutely terrifying. Nia spent her entire shift in a daze, mechanically serving customers while her mind raced. Part of her was overwhelmed with gratitude. This scholarship was the answer to prayers she'd stopped praying years ago. With it, she could become the nurse she'd always wanted to be. She could build a career that mattered, earn enough to give Amina security, create the stable life they'd both dreamed of. But another part of her felt manipulated, controlled. Julian had made a life-changing decision for her without her input, as if her agency in her own future was irrelevant. The scholarship came with invisible strings, obligation, debt, the knowledge that her success would always be connected to his generosity. What did he expect in return? When her shift ended, Nia walked home through the crowded Queen streets, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Julian's gesture proved he cared about her future, but it also proved how easy it was for him to alter her life's trajectory without her consent. Trust and fear warred in her chest like opposing armies. By the time she reached her building, one question burned brighter than all the rest. Was this love, or was it control disguised as kindness? The answer would determine everything that came next. Julian's text arrived at 8 p.m., simple and direct. "Can we talk? I'm downstairs." Nia's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked out her window. The same black sedan from 3 nights ago waited at the curb, Julian's silhouette visible through the tinted glass. She could pretend she hadn't seen the message. Let him wait until he gave up and drove away. Preserve the safe distance that protected her from hope and disappointment alike. Instead, she grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs. Julian stepped out of the car as she approached, his face uncertain in the streetlight's glow. Gone was the confident billionaire from a restaurant. In his place stood someone who looked genuinely worried about her reaction. "You got the letter," he said. "It wasn't a question. I got the letter." Nia's voice was carefully neutral. They faced each other on the cracked sidewalk, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. "Are you angry?" Julian asked quietly. Nia considered the question seriously. "I don't know what I am." Julian nodded, as if he'd expected that response. "I know how it looks. I know it seems presumptuous." "It doesn't seem presumptuous," Nia interrupted. "It is presumptuous. You made a decision about my life without asking me." "You're right." Julian's admission surprised her. "I acted on impulse because I couldn't stand the thought of you sacrificing your dreams for lack of opportunity." "But they're my dreams to sacrifice," Nia said, her voice rising slightly. "My choices to make. Even if they're hard choices, even if they're wrong choices, they're mine." Julian ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his tell when he felt overwhelmed. "I know," he said. "And I know that my money comes with complications you never asked for. I know that accepting help from someone like me means dealing with assumptions about your motivations, your character, your independence." He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face in the dim light. "But Nia, I also know that the system is rigged against people like you. No matter how smart you are, how hardworking, how deserving. Without resources, dreams stay dreams. I had the power to change that for you, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't act." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "This isn't charity," Julian continued. "This is investment in someone whose impact on the world will be immeasurable. The scholarship has no strings attached. If you never want to see me again after tonight, the money is still yours." Nia stared at him, processing his words. "You'd really do that? Give me everything and expect nothing in return?" "Yes." Julian's answer came without hesitation. "Because that's what love does. It gives without keeping score." The word love hung in the night air between them, fragile and powerful. "How can you love someone you've known for 3 days?" Nia whispered. Julian's smile was sad and genuine. "The same way you can love someone whose life you've been watching from a distance for months, hoping for the chance to prove that good people still deserve good things." The admission sent chills down Nia's spine. He'd been watching her? For months? "I'm scared," she said, the words becoming her constant refrain. "Of me. Of owing someone more than I can ever repay." Julian stepped forward until they were close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "You don't owe me anything, Nia. You never will." The next morning brought a complication neither of them had anticipated. Nia was leaving her apartment building, scholarship letter clutched in her hand as she headed to Columbia's admissions office, when a sleek silver car pulled up beside Julian's sedan. Victoria Sterling stepped out. Even from a distance, Nia could tell this woman belonged to Julian's world in a way she never would. Everything about Victoria screamed expensive, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to her designer handbag that probably cost more than Nia made in 6 months. Julian's face went pale when he saw his ex-fiancée approaching. "Julian, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the street, sweet as poisoned honey. "We need to talk." Nia felt her stomach drop. She'd heard that tone before, from customers who spoke sweetly while treating her like dirt, from landlords who smiled while raising rent, from people who wielded power disguised as politeness. Victoria's gaze swept over Nia dismissively before focusing entirely on Julian. "I see you're playing charity case again. How noble of you." "Victoria." Julian's voice was ice cold. "What are you doing here?" "Protecting you from yourself, apparently." Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Photos of you at Le Bernardin with this are all over social media. The board is concerned about your judgment." Nia's cheeks burned with humiliation. Of course there were photos. Of course people were talking. She'd been naive to think their dinner was private. "The board can mind their own business," Julian said firmly. "Can they?" Victoria pulled out her phone, swiping through images with practiced efficiency. "Because according to my sources, Some major investors are questioning whether someone who makes impulsive decisions about dinner companions can be trusted with billion-dollar acquisitions. She held up her phone, showing Julian something that made his jaw clench. "They're calling it the charity dinner scandal," Victoria continued. "Speculation about your motives, her motives, what this little arrangement really involves. Stock prices have already dipped 2%. Nia felt sick. She was hurting Julian's business just by existing in his proximity. The weight of his world, the expectations, the scrutiny, the costs of association, crashed down on her like a physical blow. "Furthermore," Victoria said, her voice growing sharper, "I've done some research on your new friend. Did you know she owes over $40,000 in student loans from her incomplete nursing program? That her family has a history of financial instability? That associating with someone so desperate for money makes you look incredibly naive." Each word hit like a slap. Nia's financial struggles, laid bare and weaponized against her character. Julian stepped protectively in front of Nia. "That's enough, Victoria." "Is it?" Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "Because I'm offering you a way out before this gets worse. End this little social experiment now, quietly, and I can help manage the narrative. Keep playing savior, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of gold digger you've fallen for." The threat hung in the morning air like smoke. Nia looked at Julian's tense shoulders, at Victoria's predatory confidence, at the expensive cars and designer clothes that reminded her how far outside her league she'd wandered. For the first time since receiving the scholarship letter, she understood the true cost of Julian's generosity. The silence stretched endlessly as Victoria waited for Julian's response. Nia felt like she was watching her future pivot on the edge of a knife. She could see Julian's internal struggle, his desire to protect her warring against the professional consequences Victoria had outlined. Stock prices, board concerns, public scrutiny. The real world was crashing down on their fragile connection with devastating efficiency. "I need a moment," Julian said finally. "Victoria, wait in your car." Victoria's smile was triumphant. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need to make the right decision." As Victoria glided back to her silver car, Nia felt her walls slam back into place. This was exactly what she'd feared, that caring for Julian would come with costs too high for either of them to pay. "Nia," Julian started, his voice strained. "She's right," Nia said quietly. Julian's head snapped up. "What?" "She's right about all of it. I am desperate for money. My family is financially unstable. I do owe thousands in student loans." Nia's voice grew stronger with each admission. "And associating with me is hurting you. None of that matters." "It all matters." The words exploded out of her. "Your stock price, your board, your reputation. That's your life, Julian. That's your responsibility to thousands of employees who depend on your decisions." Julian stepped toward her, but Nia backed away. "I can't be the reason you lose everything you've built," she continued. "I won't be responsible for destroying your world because I was selfish enough to hope I could be part of it." "You're not destroying anything," Julian said desperately. "Victoria is manipulating the situation." "Is she wrong, though?" Nia's question cut through his protests. "Will people question your judgment? Will investors doubt your decisions? Will this hurt your company?" Julian's hesitation was answer enough. Nia felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. She pulled the scholarship letter from her jacket pocket and held it out to him. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It comes with too high a price for both of us." "Nia, please." "I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I need to know that whatever I achieve, I earned it myself. Not because someone felt sorry for me, not because someone wanted to save me, but because I was strong enough to save myself." Julian's face crumpled. "You don't have to save yourself alone anymore." "Yes, I do." Nia pressed the letter into his hands. "Because if I don't, I'll never know who I really am underneath all your generosity." She looked at him one last time, memorizing his face, the kindness in his eyes, the love she was walking away from, and whispered, "Goodbye, Julian." As she turned and walked back toward her building, she heard him call her name. But she didn't turn around. Behind her, Victoria Sterling was already getting out of her car, ready to help Julian make the right decision. What would you do in her shoes? Subscribe to see if hope triumphs. Pride had won over trust. But sometimes the hardest battles are fought inside our own hearts, and the war wasn't over yet. The silence was deafening as Nia walked away, her heart a raw wound. She expected to hear Julian's footsteps behind her, to feel his hand on her shoulder, but all she heard was Victoria's cruel laugh and the soft hum of the city. He had chosen. He had chosen his company, his reputation, his world. She had been right all along. It was a test, and she had failed. Nia's legs felt heavy as she walked, each step a testament to her foolish hope. But then, a sound that she had not anticipated made her stop. Not the slam of a car door or the roar of a speeding engine, but Julian's voice, not for her, but for Victoria. "If you move from that car, I will have your name removed from every social registry in this city." Julian's voice was sharp, a weapon she hadn't known he possessed. "I will have you cut off from every board, every charity, every society you've ever cared about. You have until the count of 3 to drive away, and if you don't, I will prove to my board just how toxic you are." The words hung in the air, a silent threat more powerful than any loud argument. There was a pause, and then the screech of a car pulling away. Victoria was gone. Nia turned, her breath catching in her throat. Julian was walking toward her, but not with anger. He was moving with a desperate purpose, a man who had just risked his entire public life on a gamble. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, his eyes pleading, his face etched with vulnerability. "You're wrong, Nia. I didn't choose them. I chose you. You don't owe me anything. You never will. And I'm not going to lose you for a woman who has no soul." He reached out his hand, palm up, in a silent, simple offering. Nia stared at it, her heart pounding. The weight of her pride and her fear battled with the simple act of trust. He had just burned a bridge for her, a public, final act of devotion. He wasn't giving her money. He was giving her himself. What would you do in her shoes? Would you take his hand? The answer was a silent, trembling yes. She placed her hand in his, a small, fragile act that felt bigger than any skyscraper. And in that single moment, every doubt and fear, every sleepless night, every tear melted away. Her hand fit perfectly in his. The sun rose over the Queen's skyline, casting a golden hue over the brick buildings and the cracked pavement. But to Nia, it felt like a new dawn entirely. The world had not ended. The city had not fallen. The impossible had happened. Julian had stayed. They sat on her front steps, watching the world awaken around them. No grand speeches, no more promises, just quiet, peaceful presence. "I've never had a morning like this before," Julian said, his voice soft. Just a quiet, simple morning. No meetings, no distractions. Nia smiled, understanding. The man who had everything was finding peace in the things she took for granted. That was the most extraordinary thing of all. Nia finally spoke the question that had been in her heart since the night before. "What happens now?" Julian took a deep breath. "We start over. You don't have to take the scholarship. You can get a job, save up, work your way through school. You can do whatever you want." He said it with a finality that made Nia's heart soar. He had given her back her agency. "But what if we did it together?" Nia asked softly. Julian looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and hope. "What if the scholarship wasn't charity, but a shared investment? What if we used my dreams and your resources to make a difference that mattered?" Julian's eyes lit up, the business tightened once again, but with a new purpose. "What if you helped me launch a foundation, a nonprofit, that provides scholarships and opportunities for people who have been overlooked by the system? What if we called it the Torres Foundation? You want to name it after me? Nia asked in disbelief. Of course, he smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that reached his eyes. Because you are the foundation. You are the proof that true worth is not in what you have, but in what you give. And that, I've learned, is the only investment that ever truly matters. What began as a mysterious invitation had become a moral revolution. Two people from two completely different worlds, both burdened by the weight of their own expectations, had found a quiet space in the chaos of life. Their story was not a fairy tale, but a testament to the power of kindness, the bravery of vulnerability, and the unwavering truth that the world needs healers who remember what it feels like to hurt. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't let this be the last story we share. Subscribe now